We will start with Lex Hoogduin. And the topic is, does our future money need nation states? So we've been talking about the euro and a group of states, and now we're going to move to the question, are other forms of currencies, or what is the role of the state in making the currency? So let me introduce both speakers and the people who will enter in the dialogue. Let me start with Brett Scott. Brett Scott is a journalist and a campaigner. He's written a book called The Heretic's Guide to Global Finance, Hacking the Future of Money, that appeared in 2013. It's a very well-written and very easy-to-read book. He's a bottom-up financial reform activist looking for alternative finance and forms of economic activists. He writes for The Guardian, The New Scientist, Wired Magazine. He's an advisory in the group for the Brixton Pound. And he has also participated in some discussions of blockchain with the UNRISD. Thank you, Brett, for being here today.
No problem.
Lex Hoogduin is a professor of complexity and uncertainty in financial markets and financial institutions at Groningen University. He's the founder of GlowcomNet, which is the network for social complexity and uncertainty. He is a non-executive board member of the London Stock Exchange Group and the chairman of the London Clearing House. And he was a former director at the Nederlandse Bank, the Dutch central bank, in 4 different positions, in 4 different eras, some to do with research. He was also the chief economist at Robeco, and he was the head of the IRIS Joint Research Center, the Rabobank Robeco Research Center. Lex Hoogduin, thank you very much. Welcome. So, Lex, could I ask you to give us your position in about 5 minutes? Then I'll ask Scott for his 5 minutes, and then we will just have a conversation between the two of you.
So, I'm Brett Scott. I wrote a book of The Heretic's Guide to Global Finance. I've worked in the financial sector, actually, in derivative markets and stuff. I've got a whole lot of different things I work on. And I've recently been, I've been involved in money stuff for quite a long time, different types of alternative currency systems. Got involved in blockchain to some extent. And today I'm supposed to reflect on states and money. I'm also got very, very low blood sugar. I came from Deventer today. I've been for the last 3 days working with bank campaigners who basically work on, oh, that's fantastic, thank you. Who work on basically challenging how banks lend and what they lend to. So you can talk a lot about money creation processes and all, but you've got to also think about where do banks issue credit? Who do they essentially create money for? And there's a whole sort of world around financial reform there as well. And on this point about blood sugar, I went out halfway through to try and go buy myself some Coca-Cola. And unfortunately, the machine only accepts cards. And it rejected my card. So this is the automated dystopia of cashless society. How essentially it can basically screen you out and remove you if you don't have the right credentials. So I was not able to get any Coca-Cola, but I now have these things here. Another point on this as well, we've been talking a lot about money all the time. The underlying source of all economic value in this world is the human body and resources. All right? Thank you. If I cannot get actually sugar into my body, I literally cannot operate. Without this, money is completely meaningless. Money systems are essentially built on top of what essentially is the true value, which is basically your labor. And that comes from agriculture and eating things and the sun. So that's always worth bringing it back down to life. And then on top of that, you can build money systems to do whatever you want. So, onto the point. Okay, so the thing around states and money, the thing about both states and money is that you're born into these systems and actually you cannot conceive of a world without them. Your entire mind is constructed by these systems. For people to imagine a world without states and money is actually quite bizarre. You don't actually know. Your entire world, everything we do is based on these two constructs. And actually, this is quite an important point when people are thinking about the future of money. It's this overused term, but your conceptualization of the future of money is essentially formulated in the present that you're living in, with all the existing experiences you have. You then project forward these ideas about what it might be. But you also do that for the past of money. People use the present to project back what they think the past of money was. This is what you call in historical theory, presentist history. Take my current everyday experiences and imagine them in the past. It's like the Flintstones, imagining these like stone cars rolling around. This is what the barter theories of money come from, is essentially people who are used to monetary systems imagining what the world would be like without money. It's completely ahistorical, and it's based on these essentially 17th, 18th century people who've really got used to capitalist systems, trying to then project back their assumptions into worlds that didn't have those assumptions. That wasn't a very clear description. So I think maybe the key point from this is that you literally cannot separate the idea of the state and the idea of the market and the idea of money from each other. They have co-evolved together, and it's so artificial when people attempt to say, oh, well, is it the state versus the market? These are institutions that cannot exist without each other right now, and money as well, at least in my perspective.
Can you tell us a little bit about how how you can hack the system, or how you could change the system?
Have I gone past 5 minutes already?
Yes, but
okay, sorry.
I thought I'd give you a couple of extra minutes because we put you on the spot.
Let me just say one last point. A lot of alternative money systems are essentially taking state-based mentality and trying to push it into scenarios such as like local scenarios. So you say, let's take an existing monetary system and try to sort of constrain it into a local area. Or let's try to alter the existing dynamics of existing state money system. And if you really want to think about how you might build alternative exchange systems, economic distribution systems, you've got to try and imagine alternatives to human exchange itself. So the modern nation state and modern markets take one of the very most basic assumptions is that the default method of human interaction in the world is exchange. There are many alternative methods of human interaction, which include gift systems, patronage systems, reciprocity systems, which are not about explicit exchange. And as soon as you start to understand that, you can start to think of quite interesting monetary alternatives, or maybe non-monetary alternatives. And I'll end there, and we can discuss it further.
Great. Thank you. Lex, could you tell us your position in about 5 minutes?
I hardly dare to speak. Does it work now? It does. Okay. Thank you very much. What I want to do very, very briefly is to, as it were, bridge a little bit the perspective of the previous 2 sessions to what we are discussing now, the role of the state, the potential role of the state in money. First of all, to make my position clear up front, I think current major monetary systems, and I'm not just talking about the euro, I'm also talking the dollar, I'm also talking the British pound, I'm talking the Japanese yen and the Chinese renminbi, have put themselves in a situation that is unsustainable. And what's the problem with the current systems? 2 basic things. First of all, the money supply is too elastic. It's too easy to create money. And secondly, money has become unanchored. It is unrelated to an underlying value. So if you listen to this, and you've heard the previous session, you will be confused, at least. And that is because in the debate about money, you have a couple of different ways of looking at it, different economic theories. You've heard about the modern money theory in the previous session. The view from which I look at the problem is almost the opposite one. And I'd like briefly to introduce that opposite view. That view sees money as a medium of exchange. No more, no less. It's a medium of exchange. And the problems with the current monetary systems have been analyzed, I think, very carefully, and have been published by Friedrich Hayek in 1976, so 40 years ago, and I think everything that he said in that analysis is still valid today. So let me give you, as a first thing during this session, give you a tip, a booklet that you should read if you want to think about the role of money, and also think about whether you would in the end be a supporter of MMT or you would like to have another view. And this is the book that's called The Denationalization of Money. So 40 years old. And at the back of the book, it's summarized in 10 points. And what I would like to do, because I cannot say it better than Hayek, there's only one slight thing where I disagree, and I will mention that, or where I have a question, I will mention that. But I will just mention a couple of his 10 points. And I will start with the point that's the question that you put to me to answer in this 5 minutes. It's actually his 6th point, but that doesn't matter. So what he says there is money doesn't have to be created, in parentheses, legal tender by government. Doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to. That it actually happened is another case. But it doesn't have to be created legal tender by government. Like law, language, and morals, it can emerge spontaneously. Such, quote unquote, private money has in history often been preferred to government money, but government has usually soon suppressed it. I think so. That's my answer basically to the question. Yes, you can have, and we have had in the past, money that's independent from the state, where the ultimate sovereign was the individual. And not, so that's very close perhaps to what you just said. The only individual in this the only sovereign in this theory is in the end the individual. So that's the first point. So you can have it. Secondly, the question is, what is the consequence of the fact that governments have taken over, have monopolized money? Is that a solution to problems, like in MMT, who would like to have as broad as possible a space of policy, as it was called in the previous session, or is it the problem? And again, the Hayekian, I have some supporters at least for this. The Hayekian position is, then I take his first point again, because he has said it very carefully. The government monopoly of money must be abolished to stop the recurring bouts of acute inflation and deflation that have become accentuated during the last 60 years. So what he says is the problems that we have, the boom-bust cycles, are the result of government having monopolized money. The government is not a solution to an unstable financial system and can cure that. No, it's the creator of the instability itself. And he says during the past 60 years, I would say after 40 years, now it's the past century. That's point. So second point that he says, do I have...
I'll give you 2 more minutes because I gave
two more
minutes.
Two more minutes, and just to mention 2 other points that he mentions, and then also say a little bit where I think there is an open issue.
2 minutes.
So his second point is abolition of the government monopoly is also the cure for the more deep-seated disease of the recurring waves of depression and unemployment, which usually are attributed to capitalism. But it's not a private sector, stupid, he says, as it were, but it's the government who has created these boom-bust cycles and leads to recurrent problems of unemployment. His 5th point, and I will read it out. I've missed some in-between points, so perhaps not everything is fully clear, but I think it is an important point, also in the current policy debates that we have. These 4 defects he mentions that are the result of government monopoly of money: inflation, instability, undisciplined state expenditure, and economic nationalism, have a common origin and a common cure. The replacement of the government monopoly of money by competition in currency supplied by private issuers who, to preserve public confidence, will limit the quantity of their paper issue and thus maintain its value. Note the very different approach from the MMT approach. This is the denationalization of money. One remark on what I just read out and where I have a question mark and where there is an interesting let's say, research question for those interested in it, where Hayek says that if you have a private money, restricting the quantity of the paper issue, as it were, is sufficient for creating a viable currency. I have a question, I put a question mark, it's up for discussion, as it were, of whether it is sufficient. I think it is necessary, but I doubt or raise the issue of whether it is sufficient. And why do I raise that issue? That's because of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a private currency where you have a restriction in the quantity of that currency. But it is relatively volatile. Right. It's much more volatile than, let's say, the state monies that we have. And it cannot easily replace state monies at the current stage. That's why why is that? I think because in the end, I think a currency that is not linked to an underlying thing that has intrinsic value is not viable. So, for instance, the private money that we have had, the gold.
Yes, exactly. So, could you give me some examples of private money? Gold, silver. There have all kinds of other materials have circulated as money. And I must add, this is debt-free money. Right. Gold is not a debt. Mm-hmm. Gold is good in itself. And good has value in itself, and it anchors the value of the money, right, because it has value in itself. Yes. That's what I would like to say. But that, just as with Bitcoin, Bitcoin is limited. If somehow philosophers actually managed to turn lead into gold and made a lot more gold, then the intrinsic value of gold would plummet, surely.
That's true. But and we have had periods in the past, of course, where new gold was discovered. Right. But then still there is a price, a cost of mining that gold. Right. And that anchors, that puts a floor under the value of money.
Okay, so I think your position is very clear, and thank you very much for putting it out this much. And you had supporters here. So we have about 10-15 minutes for our discussion because we're going to wrap up with the three hosts. You know, I'm interested. Okay, so future money needs nation states. I'm interested. Perhaps could we explore, because the whole topic of today was reinventing money. Is there money that needs to be reinvented? Is there things that we need to do as human beings that require different kinds of monies or different kinds of systems of exchange? Or is there a call for private forms of money, whether they're very technological or not, but that allow us to do things that we can't do with state money? Would that be a way to think about the problem? Brett?
I'm going to try and respond to some things that Lex was saying. There was like a lot of stuff going through, and there's like many potential critiques you could make. But one of the points so you're talking about private monies, which is a very interesting thing. You find this phenomenon throughout the world. But you said the sovereign was the individual.
Should be.
This is, to me, it's completely erroneous. The individual is a creation of the state. The notion that you're a floating entity, separate from everything else, comes from scaled economies, where basically you don't know who you're dealing with, and essentially market transactions. It creates this alienation, where you believe you're a sort of an independent entity, despite the fact that you literally cannot survive unless you get the products of everyone else. Okay, so there's this irony in modern market systems where people believe that they're individuals and yet are the most interdependent that they've ever been in the world. So what you really are doing when you are creating new monetary systems is not giving individuals sovereignty, you're giving communities new forms of autonomy and sovereignty. So new governance structures, new political structures. So actually this debate around the euro has got to do with this, right? It's like, what is the legitimate unit of community when you're thinking about a currency? You could localize it even further. Why stop at the nation state? Why is a nation state somehow a democratic entity that represents a true economy? Why not make it a region or a city? Okay. Now the question here is that there's many trade-offs involved in this these decisions. As soon as you reduce the scale, you reduce your level of economic production, essentially. This phone that I'm holding right here is a production of hundreds of thousands of people around the world. This is a product of the modern monetary system. This cannot be created in an alternative local currency system because your pool of human labor is so much lower. So if you're ever thinking about building alternative currencies, you're thinking about these trade-offs. Do we want community autonomy in a sense of a lack of alienation, or do we want giant scaled economies with huge amounts of consumer products? Okay, so these are sort of design questions. And the last thing I'll end off with here, I'm going to give you some examples. But this idea that like this fetishization of gold I've always found bizarre. I mean, again, it comes from this sort of state-created notion of individuals. And why I say the state creates a notion of individuals is the state is a thing that enables scale in economies, which enables divisions of labor and people who essentially operate in markets and who actually start to think about themselves as individuals in that context. All right? Then, if you start to put libertarian politics in that, you want to try and create this sort of imagination of a type of money that doesn't rely upon people to gain its value. So you fetishize this weird object. You're like, I don't need other people to realize that actually there's value internal to it magically somehow. All right? Gold gets all its value, it's derived from communities. The idea that it has intrinsic value is a complete fallacy. Okay. I mean, sorry, it's a bit of an attack. Let me give some examples.
Do you have
some tangible examples,
and then you have a question for Lex, perhaps?
No. I mean, look, Hayek has some interesting points about, look, people when they have ability to, make decisions locally. But Hayek is also a philosophy of extreme alienation. That the only way you run an economy is through people who don't know what's going on and will make localized decisions, right? I mean, really, what you want to do is if you want to try and if you're authentically interested in people having autonomy, you got to reduce the scale.
Okay. And some examples then in that case. Okay.
So now these different types of scales you can choose are we could try to create a currency between a small group of people like us, but really there's not enough a diverse labor here in a group like this. You can't really make meaningful currencies in very, very small groups of people. Mm-hmm. Local currencies, things like the Bricks and Pound, which I'm part of, which is a London-based currency, they try to limit it to a particular local area, and there's a particular economic philosophy behind that, which says particular parts, local areas get excluded in the context of national economies. You could imagine this actually if you scale it up to a euro level, particular countries get excluded in certain types of currency networks. But in the context of like London, Brixton is an area that gets excluded. So they say, let's create our own economic networks here. Mm-hmm. You can do it at the level of a region. So a really good example of this is Sardex in Sardinia, mutual credit systems, got a different design to the Bricks and Pound. But they're saying, Sardinia, in the context of Italy, small businesses there get excluded by the banking system. We will create a mutual credit system, which is essentially a way of creating money. And do it at that scale. Bitcoin is particularly interesting because it tries to create this transnational currency, which has none of the local dynamics of any of these other ones, but it has a sort of different, essentially a transnational aspiration. I'm going to pass it across to Lex.
But I had a question. Do you actually use several forms of currency?
Of course. I have used Bitcoin for certain types of things. I use many alternative systems, Bricks and Pound, various forms of mutual credit systems. I don't know if you guys understand mutual credit systems, but you should really investigate mutual credit systems if you're interested in alternative money systems. But also
so you use them. So you find that for certain things you can use you use multiple systems at the same time. That works for you.
Sure, but of course, don't romanticize this. This makes things harder for you. The basic point about any kind of scaled system is that it's efficient, which means in the short term, your short-term interests are geared towards it, right? So, of course, people are always geared towards large corporations, large systems, but of course, they often lose their autonomy in the process and get extremely alienated. So it's harder to go against these systems.
Okay, thank you. Lex, could you answer some of the philosophical points about the creation of money or the position of the individual or any other ways?
What I would like to do is make 2 points. First, trying to answer a little bit your question, and secondly, saying something about the role of the individual versus the state, perhaps. First of all, I don't think it's urgency to find new monetary systems for new types of interactions. That's not the most important reason for wanting to look at alternative systems. For me, the main reason is, as I said at the beginning, I fear, there's always some scientific doubt, but I fear that the current systems as we have them, with the state monopolies and the type of policies that we run, and what we would if we would apply the MMT philosophy, we would even intensify. That those policies in the end would really destabilize the financial system, would lead us to even stronger boom-bust cycles, as we have seen the past 40 years. That's for me a reason to seriously think about what can we do. And I think we have to follow two tracks. First of all, the government should not hinder and perhaps even stimulate the development of alternative private money, and leave it to the private sector to experiment with the medium of exchange that they want to use. And they should not start to interfere at the moment that it becomes successful. So being supportive of that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I'm acutely aware that you cannot simply now jump from the current system that we have to say, okay, let's stop with the state monopoly and let's leave it to the private sector. That's, I'm afraid, a recipe for failure. So I think we should at the same time urgently repair the current system. And the elements in the repair are things that, for instance, were mentioned by Arnoud Boot. Far more equity in the banks, but and a couple of other things that he mentioned in the report that was published earlier. But what I think is missing in the report is the monetary reform that is necessary. He focuses on repairing again the private sector, the private banking system. I think what is necessary that what we have is that central banks first of all, the banking system, we should move in a direction again where we were before the government started to corrupt the system, as it were, full reserve banking. So deposits backed up by reserves. Clear
is a system that Michael Koumhoff suggested. Is that a full reserve system?
I wasn't there.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
I haven't all the details of that system.
The Chicago plan.
The Chicago plan. I have sympathy for the Chicago plan, but again, to move there in one step is perhaps too difficult. But the element of full reserves in the Chicago plan, I fully support. I think what is necessary also is that that's central bank policy, that central banks, again, opposite from what is argued in MMT, should be more strongly restricted in, for instance, programs like QE, OMT, all the things that the European Central Bank is doing, which absolutely opposite to what was meant to be done. Another thing that's often not mentioned, but what should be mentioned, what also has been abused, the so-called lender of last resort function. The lender of last resort function should not apply to the government. That's the first thing, but that's basically the same as saying that QE is not allowed. But what also has been abused on a very grand scale is the so-called lender of last resort of private banks. In the current crisis in Europe, if I see how much ELA, which is emergency liquidity assistance, has been provided to the Greek banking system, to the Irish banking system, more than 150 billion to the Irish banking system. And emergency means that it is for a short period of time. It has been.
Right. So there's a problem in the liquidity.
It was a bailout via the central bank, a hidden bailout under the flag of emergency liquidity assistance. Right. So the provision of emergency liquidity assistance should be strongly restricted. Final thing is that there should be a rule, a stronger rule for the maturity mismatch that banks are allowed to have.
Right.
Then a couple of words. I know we are running out of time, but I'd like to say something
very quickly. We have 2 more minutes.
I cannot do justice to the question. But one thing I'd like to say is that there are other forms of working together and cooperation than just the state. The point of, let's say, the libertarians and the more the neo-Austrian view about the state is that you are forced to participate. You have to pay your taxes, and if you don't do that, you will be punished. You have to you pay a penalty, and even worse. So nothing against cooperation. On the contrary, the market system is the biggest cooperation mechanism that we have invented.
Right.
But something against forcing something on individuals, where in the end the individual have to decide. So you're forced to be a member. I'm Dutch. I've never chosen to be Dutch. That's what the libertarian view has against the role of the state.
So I want to thank you both very much. I have a final question for you both, but I was going to ask you to just give me a one-sentence answer. This is a question we have from the public. Lex, for you, would you have abolished the Nederlandse Bank as its president?
I think the consequence of what I said, what the policy should be, is not at this stage abolish central banks, so also not the Dutch central bank, but very hard push for reforms, in this case of the ECB policies, and at the same time encourage, as said, private experiments. If they become successful, then be prepared to accept the consequences, that central banks can be turned into musea.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a sentence. And a question for you, Brett. In terms of your activism, if you had a magic wand or you had a support and something in this financial system, you could change one thing, or one thing would be easy to change, what would you change?
Wow. I'd like people to realize that value does not reside in money. If you understand that, you can understand a lot of things. And I'd like it also people to understand that states create markets.
Right. So it's actually a level of understanding you want to reach.
Yeah, if you understand these things, you start to come to a lot of conclusions. So actually, maybe then my thing I'd really like, if you really want to contest the power of the financial sector, you should do education reform, probably, of some sort.
Great. Thank you very much, Lex Hoogduin, Brett Scott. Okay, thank you very much. You just said back, yeah, thanks, Brett. So I know we've had your attention and your patience for 3 hours, and I know it's past 7. We started a few minutes late, so we would like to end a few minutes late for the people who'd like to stay for 10 more minutes. I'd like to invite the 3 organizers, the 3 hosts of the Reinventing Money session, the people who brought you this. Paul Buiting, Richard van der Linden, Martijn Jeroen van der Linden. And could you give us some short, sharp reflections of what surprised you, where you can take this, and questions that remain?
Yeah, sure. Well, I know it's been a long evening or afternoon, so we'll try to keep it short, a few minutes. I've realized once again how complicated the knowledge is, or the understanding the system, and also how many different opinions are as to what the problems are and what the solutions are. And of course, we knew in advance by inviting someone from MMT or inviting someone like Lex, who's more of a libertarian, that you would have conflicting opinions. But I think it's good for people to understand that there are different views out there. I'm more of a libertarian. I like experiments. I like people to try their own currencies and see if it works. And of course, we've seen with things like Bitcoin that you can grow a mass of people using something freely across the world, and I like that. At the same time, I also have a lot of sympathy for the position that with the euro we need reform, because the way we are in the euro right now doesn't seem sustainable at all. But I would like to thank everyone for coming, because it's I know it's a difficult topic, but it's very good that you guys are here and try to absorb everything you can. And I would like to also hear the opinion of Richard and Martijn, of course, what they feel about today, and if they've learned something, and your opinion. Yeah, well, where we started off was, okay, how do we structure a debate about money and about
like the important topics we have right now. And then we looked at different interviews, and we saw that semantics and fundamentals basically are not separated. So when there is a discussion about debt-free money, then what is the definition of money that you use? Because otherwise, it could perhaps be something that actually is debt-free, but maybe by the other party is not considered to be money. So you get a discussion about those kind of things. And today also we saw on Twitter a lot of questions about debt-free money, and isn't gold debt-free? Well, then the question is it money, and what kind of definition do you use? And you have to parse that into your into the whole theory that you present. And that is kind of the thing that remains, I think, also after the event of today, that it is just very difficult to agree upon a theoretical framework to discuss the different policy options you have. So I'm not sure if we finished this or solved this problem, but I think we definitely contributed to it. And well, we also got a new problem with the definitions today, because now the F word also has two definitions. We heard one from Ancilla and one from Stephanie. So yeah, there will definitely be something to think about.
Yes, some words. So what is interesting in this debate is that there are different schools of economic thinking. And I'm writing my PhD about this topic. And that's in a way a problem. So if conflicting schools, and they see different problems, but it's also very interesting to have these views. And these different views give us a broader view of reality, I think. And with this event, we try to bridge the gap between these different views. So that's what we try to do, and I hope you managed a little bit. And I think there are three fundamental questions. So the first question is, who is under which conditions allowed to create money for what? So that's a very fundamental question. The second is, on which balance sheet is the money dependent, or of which balance sheet is the money dependent? So where is it at the moment? And the third question is the relation between money and the legal political system. So I think these three questions we should investigate further and explore further and debate further.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the wrap-up. So I'd like to invite Michael Kumhoff, Stephanie Kelton, Brett Scott, and Lex Hoogduin, the four remaining speakers, to just come on stage so we can thank you. Yes, you can get the mic, one of the mics here if you want. Also want to thank Arnoud Boot, who already left us, and I want to thank the three politicians, Ancilla van der Leest, and Thierry Baudet, and Paul Tang, who also had to go and run their campaigns and convince people to vote for them. So thank you very much for all your contributions. Did you want to add something? Did you want to say something? No. Oh, yeah. Well.
Of course, Karim, also, thank you very much.
Yes, let me one more thing. Yeah. One more thing. So yes, he needs to beg for money, but I thought I should do it. So if you enjoyed Reinventing Money, if you want to have this again next year, and we invite more people and investigate what money is, how it could function, its relationship to the political system and society. There were some donation boxes when you leave. It's just like the Catholic Church. But there was a slide with a Bitcoin code for those of you who are Bitcoin savvy. But there's lots of ways in which you can contribute in a way that would help us to organize it next year. And Paul, I'll give you the last word then.
Yeah, and we'll also send an email afterwards with the Bitcoin donation code, but also how you can donate some euros. So in advance, thank you very much for that. So we can keep on doing those events, and every time we learn from how we have to organize it, how we have to bring people together. And it's amazing to see so many different people from all sorts of schools and walks of life together. So thanks again for coming. And Karim, thank you very much for moderating everything. It was a delight.
Thank you.